Some people say that we test more than we teach. And then teachers are told not to teach to the test, but then they're told that the test will be used to evaluate their performance. So teachers feel pressured to do well on standardized tests, and then they feel embarrassed when students don't. And to make matters worse, students see testing as a punishment for their deficiencies rather than a celebration of their learning. So what do we do about this? First, I'm going to tell you where standardized testing even came from. Then, I'm going to tell you how you can beat the system. So standardized testing started in Boston in about the 1800s. And then by the end of World War I, it kind of made its way around the whole entire nation. Then, quiz here, in 1957, what happened? Sputnik. In 1957, Russia launched Sputnik into the universe, into the outer space. And then the USA felt pressured to kind of keep up with Russia because they were doing things that we never heard of anybody doing before. So they were like, how can we keep up? So in 1958, the legislation passed the National Defense Act. And what that did was give federal funding behind standardized testing. And the goal here was to push standardized testing into schools so that we can weed out and find our geniuses that can help us keep up with Russia. But now, as of today, standardized testing is literally mandatory in schools. And research shows that the average student will take about 112 standardized tests in their K-12 career. That's just ridiculous. So how did we get here? Well, let's go back to 2002. In 2002 is when we had the world famous No Child Left Behind Act. And at first, it sounded really good, honestly. It sounded really good. Like, listen, check it out.
Sure, no child is left behind. Every child must learn to read, and every child must learn to add and subtract. So in return for federal dollars, we're asking states to design accountability systems.
So that means that in order for schools to get funding, they had to standardize tests, and schools were punished when they didn't perform well. After trying that for a couple of years and not necessarily seeing the gains that we wanted to see, in 2009, the Obama administration came out with the Race to the Top Act. And what this did was provide more funding for different states, and they would compete with different measures. And one of those things that they were measuring was test scores. So by 2014, at the time where everybody was supposed to be proficient in reading and math, the census came out, and still less than 50% of all students in 4th grade and 8th grade, when they took the end of grade reading proficiency assessment, were not proficient. So then in 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act was passed. And that didn't get rid of testing, but the goal there was to make testing more equitable and more fair for all students. So is that working? Well, based off of most recent data that is available, only 37% of US high school seniors are reading at and above proficiency levels by the time they leave high school. So no, it's not working. But here we go. What do we do about it? Because it seems as if testing is not going anywhere. It seems like it's here to stay. It's still going to be tied to funding. It's still going to be tied to federal dollars, which means it's still going to be something that's pushed by schools and districts, and still going to be something that's used to evaluate teachers. So how do we beat the system? What is it that we do about that to make sure that we are playing the game but still doing what's best for students? Well, real quickly, since we're talking about testing, fun fact, the only reason why I became a math teacher, well, the main reason why I became a math teacher is because I did better on the math portion of the SAT than I did on the reading portion of the SAT. And we're all bought into standardized testing. So when I saw those scores senior high school, I was like, man, I guess I'm good at math. Let me go ahead and be a math teacher. So that's literally how I ended up here. Here you go. Here's how you beat the system. The first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you keep the testing environment the same all year. Because you want to take high stakes testing and make it have low stakes pressure. Meaning, when students sit down to take the end of grade assessment, you want it to be another day at the office. You want it to be something that they're typically accustomed to do. So what you have to do is look at your state's laws and see what the testing structures, what the testing procedures are in your state. So if you have to collect cell phones for testing all year. If you have to sit in rows for testing all year. The reason why is because we want them to sit down for the test at the end of the year and just say, this is just another day at the office. This is just what we do when it's time for testing. That takes some of the pressure off. So that is not so high stakes when it's time for them to take the actual real end of grade assessment. You also want to play on student mindset. Sometimes students feel anxious about the test because we feel anxious about the test. They feel the pressure from families, they feel the pressure from teachers, they feel the pressure from districts and administrators, they feel the pressure and they get anxious about it because they feel as if they have to perform well. Like I was saying earlier, they don't see testing as a celebration of their success, of their learning. They see it more of a punishment for their deficiencies. But what we have to let them know is that you are more than a test score. We have to have these conversations with students that allow them to know that regardless of how you perform on this standardized test, regardless how you perform on this one activity, this does not define you. And I don't want you to wrap your whole being, wrap your whole who I am into this one assignment, this one activity, this one indicator, because this doesn't define you. And as a matter of fact, I have linked in the description below a free script that you can use, that I've used with my students, that you can use to inspire and encourage and remind them that they are more than a test score. You can download that for your class and read it to them before we're taking any sort of standardized test, to remind them to just relax and do the best that you can. But that doesn't really address the actual scores, right? So here's what you can do. I've been playing with this for the last couple of years. In one school that I was working at, we made sure that the school stayed on pace, on grade level standards, doing what we had to do and pushing forward towards the test. Make sure they got everything they needed by the end of the year. Test scores were okay. In another school, we prioritized growth, and we just met the students where they were and gave them what they needed, even if it was below grade level, which was the case for most students. And by the end of that year, test scores were very similar to the other school. But the following school year, in the school in which we pushed growth, those students, they started off at a lot better place than the other school was starting off. What am I saying? If you prioritize growth, or if you prioritize just the regular standards, at the end of that first initial year, the scores are gonna be poor regardless. But when you prioritize growth, it has a long-term effect, because I have learned that when growth is prioritized, mastery is inevitable. So we're talking about making sure we perform well on the test scores this year. That may be tough, but if you prioritize growth and meet the students where they are and give them what they need, then long term, the school is going to grow towards mastery, because the students are actually learning what they need to know. When we just push the standards just to push the standards, and when we just give them the content just to say that we cover the content, that's not truly what's most effective. So competency-based education, give the students what they need when they need it, and prioritize growth, because when growth is prioritized, mastery is inevitable. Pursue excellence moment. Comment down below, how do you feel about standardized testing? Make sure you subscribe so you can see the responses to those comments. In the meantime, check out some of these videos that I will link right here, especially when I'm talking about how to quiet your noisy middle school classroom. You don't want to miss that. I'll see you in the next one.